Inbox searching activated.
Welcome to Xena.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the workshop. I realized that there's an issue with the video from episode 1 of this playfield swap. So apparently when I made all the video, most of it got lost or corrupted or something when I tried to transfer it off the iPhone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do just kind of a catch-up video just to go over what I do in the beginning of a playfield swap, how I start, and get you kind of caught up to where I was when I started video 2, which will now be video 1. So if it looks a little weird and the clothes change or whatever, that's what it is. I'm just kind of going back and trying to catch everybody up. So sorry for the error. I'll try and do better next time. This is all new to me. I'm not a techie person, so I screwed something up and lost a bunch of video. Happens. So hope you like this episode. Let's get going. So when I start a playfield swap, I start with blind nuts. They require the most force to get in. They're kind of the most difficult part of it, and it's really hard to do on a rotisserie. So I put blind nuts in first. So if you look, these, focus camera, there we go. So these are blind nuts that I get at an aftermarket store, Ace Hardware, whatever. You can get these. The problem is that the little tabs that go into the playfield are thicker on these than on the originals. So I'm going to grab an original and I'm going to grab an aftermarket one and show you what I'm talking about. It's an example of aftermarket versus original blind nuts. This one is new from a big box store, and this one is original. So if you look, if I can get it to focus right, I hope you can see that the spikes, the little tines on the one from Home Depot, are way bigger than the original. And that makes them a lot harder to put in. So the point here is save your blind nuts. If you can, once you get the playfield done, take them out, save them, reuse them. That's what I do. I have kind of a stash of originals, and I only use the ones from Home Depot or Lowe's if I have to. But really try and use original blind nuts if you can. It'll make your life a lot easier. I put in blind nuts by use of a rubber mallet. That's probably not the greatest way to do it. I know that there are some people that have come up with a little tool that's kind of a pressure tool where you have two sort of metal discs, and there's felt on the side that goes on the playfield, obviously, to keep it from scratching, and then you have a threaded wing nut that you can thread down and sort of pull the blind nut up into the playfield. That would probably be better, honestly. I haven't had any issues with playfields cracking or clears cracking or anything doing it with the rubber mallet. It's just a little bit brutal. I take them inside. I put them on the carpet so they have some padding, and then I just use the rubber mallet and tap them in. And then if I need to flatten them out, I'll use a nut driver. And if you take the nut driver and you put pressure, put it on the edge, and use a regular hammer and just hammer it around kind of in a circle, it'll tend to seat these a little bit better. And again, these are all ones from Home Depot, so they're a little harder to do. And that's because I was running low on my stash of originals. So with this playfield done, I will have a fresh stash of originals for the next one. So also remember to put these little keeper screws in. This really just keeps these from backing out over time and falling out of the bottom of the playfield. So I make sure to put these in on all of my blind nuts. Another thing I like to do early on in a playfield swap is the pop bumper nails. These have to be countersunk, and I'll show you how I do that when I flip this playfield over. But they do have to be put in early. You can do this on the rotisserie. It doesn't take that much force. There's two kinds. There's ones that have fins on the end, and there's one that have a little reverse threading, I guess it is. Either way, they both screw in and or hammer into the playfield, and you want them to sit very flush. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a lot of ball damage and such. It's going to wear on your pop bumpers and as they're firing, etc. So you don't want to do that on your components on the playfield. So I do that second after I get the blind nuts in. Once that's done, I transfer sockets or install sockets. It depends on what you want to do. If you buy new sockets, you're going to look at an additional probably $60 to $80 of cost, depending on how many sockets there are. You can see on Xenon there are a lot. And these were in really good shape. They weren't very corroded or anything, so I decided to go ahead and use them. So what I did was I desoldered all these wires and then desoldered the socket off of the ground braid, removed the screw, and then just transferred them one at a time. You can then screw them back in, and once you get everything down and you know where a lot of your major components are going to go, then I just go through and run ground braid, which you can see here. And I try and just copy the original playfield as best I can and run the ground braid. You really want to be careful to run your ground braid correctly, because if you don't and you have metal-to-metal connection somewhere, you're going to get dead shorts, which are really hard to chase down after it's all said and done. So I run my ground braid and I go through and I solder everything in, and then I check continuity just to make sure that everything is connected that's supposed to be connected and that I don't have any dead shorts anywhere. Speaking of, here's a little error I found. This was supposed to be grounded to this, but you can see there's not enough slack there anymore. So I'm going to put a little patch piece across here and just connect those two so this guy has ground. But I found that after I had done the ground braid already, so I'll just have to fix that. So I do that, and then what you can do is unscrew everything off the old playfield and move it all over. Very important to document everything before you move it. I actually do that before I do anything. I guess that would technically be my very first step, is to do a couple of things. Number one, I take pictures of the entire playfield and as many angles as I can, and then I also usually do a video with my iPhone of the playfield itself so that you know exactly where everything goes when it comes time to put it all back together. Super important. I seem to always not have enough images. I can't think of a playfield swap I've done where I didn't get to the end and think, oh, I should have taken more pictures. So you can never take too many pictures. Pictures are easy on your iPhone. I usually end up with something like 150 pictures or so by the time I'm done. And you can actually, if you do this, you know, repeatedly, you can just sort of have a repository. I have them on my main computer, and I just keep them all for later reference. So that way, if I don't happen to have a shot on one particular playfield, I can go and get another one. Here's another thing I have to fix. This guy is not soldered in, so I'll fix that. And neither is this ground. It should go right there. Actually, that's not true. It goes right there. So that guy goes there. Anyhow, all things you find as you're looking. So once I get that done, I will then unscrew everything, move everything over in one big mess, and that's where the last, or the first video of the series that I did yesterday starts. Alright, so here we are, video 2 on the Xenon restoration, and this is the playfield swap. I've taken the harness off of the old playfield and basically just set it on top of this playfield. It's on my rotisserie. It looks like a mess right now, and this is kind of the most intimidating part of the whole restoration process, in my opinion, is when you get this mess of wires on here and you say, oh my God, what did I do? It's never going to be right again. But it will be. Just go through it systematically. Take a lot of pictures before you take everything off, and then just, there's no real way to do this, in my opinion, right or wrong. I just start at one end and start going down the other way. I try and get a lot of the major mechanisms in place so that I can start looking at where the harness itself runs. And if you can get the harness, the main harness areas in place, and start putting in the larger mechs, everything kind of falls into place and then it starts getting easier. So that's the plan today. You can see I've got my rollover buttons here, all done. These are all cleaned in the ultrasonic cleaner and then polished just a little bit with some Novus 2. I'm gonna kind of clean up the ends here just so they won't be quite as ratty. And then I'll get those reinstalled over here in their little keepers before I do anything else. So I'm just gonna time lapse it and start working. Okay, so here's an idea where I'm at. I've soldered in the leads to the GI sockets on both sides. I have soldered in the leads to all of these controlled lamps here at the upper arch. All of these switches have been installed. And what I like to do here, and this is another, just a little tip. So don't believe these little marks that come on the playfield. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. I'd say it's probably 50-50 chance. So always make sure that you are visually looking at everything to make sure it's right before you start drilling any holes. You can see, for example, right here, that's clearly not the spot for anything. The dimples on this particular mechanism are off by like 1/4 inch. So one of the big point here is that if you just start drilling things into the playfield based on these dimples, you're gonna get major problems. So what I like to do with any kind of a switch, a leaf switch, is put the front side in first so I get a little pivot point, and then I'll hold the switch in place as I drill the pilot hole for the back screw. And then I'll install both, and that way they go on straight. I also discovered that I had forgotten to install this ground braid here. Whoops. So I went ahead and installed that, stapled it in, soldered it in, and connected it. It's kind of hard to see up here. Can't really see it very well. But it is connected right there to the ground for the entire GI strand there, so it's going to get ground correctly. And I do try and do these kinds of solder joints, if I can get it to focus there, these kind of solder joints that are really sort of way down on the wood. And most of them are solder joints for grounds to the actual ground braid itself. I try and do that very early on because the more things you get installed, the harder it becomes to get down there and start to do this kind of soldering way down deep. So try and get that done early. So just continue on working my way down. I am going to also be replacing a lot of these. You can see, like, for example, this pop bumper spoon is broken. I've got some new ones, so I'll be replacing that one. The other ones, all right, I thought I'd show you guys pop bumper assembly here. So first off, I made a little mistake on the other pop bumper, and I figured something out, which maybe everybody else knew, but I didn't. So these brackets on Bally's that go on the back of the pop bumper, basically they're there to hold the screws that hold the pop bumper body down to the playfield. And there's obviously two ends. And the thing you want to make sure of when you put these in is that this little skinnier end goes towards the side with the pop nails, because what's going to happen then is the pop bumper bracket is going to sit over the top of it like that, and you don't want it to be hitting. And if you have the fat end over here, it's going to hit and it's not going to do right. So I had that one in backwards. You might have noticed in the time lapse, I had to take time and unscrew it, turn it around, re-drill it, etc. So I learned from my mistake, and I'll learn from my mistake as well. And when you install these, skinny end goes towards the pop nails. Now, how I install these, the way I found easiest is to put the pop bumper body, put the whole pop bumper assembly on the top side of the playfield, and then put the screws down and screw them into these first. And then make sure everything is lined up correctly, and then screw in your screws here to lock it down. That'll make sure that you don't get any binding of this, of the pop ring, and that it's correct. So when I'm going to go ahead and rebuild this pop switch real quick. So this one, as you can see, is broken. So we're just going to rebuild that real quick. So take my trusty screwdriver here and just pop this free. And the tools to do this are really just a screwdriver, and I like to use an X-Acto knife to get these little body leaves off. So there's a little plate there that goes in the back that it screws into. You can take these screws out. Okay. So now you've got these spacer pieces that need to come off. Now you can sometimes get them with your fingernail, but if you can't, what you need to do is take your trusty X-Acto knife and, being careful to not cut yourself, just try and work it in between like that and pry it off. And once this lock piece comes off, the other ones come off really easily. So just remember your orientation, right? I've got my new one here. It's going to go on like that. So we're just going to wiggle this off here, like that. And this guy's going to go on this way. Whoops. Okay, so here's an issue. So you can see right there, that's not wide enough. So welcome to pinball restoration. Let's drill that out. Don't think that's quite wide enough yet.
20 minutes later.
That's quite close. I just need to open it a little bit. So let's just take the same bit. Just a touch. Oh. Oh. There we go. Look at that. Beauty. Okay. And if you don't know the orientation on these, the little hat part, the pointy part, goes up towards the switch, because the little finger of the skirt is going to go into the recessed area there. So we'll just put this back on, squeeze it down, and then we'll put the locker back on top. And then a lot of times I like to just give this a squeeze with some pliers, just to make sure it's kind of like seated correctly. Just a gentle little squeeze, don't break it. All right, so now what we'll do is we put these screws back in the top, and this will seat down a little bit better as you screw it down. So that's fine. And screw this down. And we'll get this side. Now, sometimes, especially on these switches that have capacitors on the end, you'll need to replace them. Now, this one didn't have any switch errors that I know of. I might find some when I troubleshoot. So I'm not going to replace all these capacitors just yet. But if you look at sort of the back of this switch, so you've got two sets of wires. You've got a diode going between them. And it's important to know that the banded part of the diode goes towards the capacitor lug of the switch. And then you have these capacitors. Now, these were mainly on Bally's because my understanding is that they had issues with, in their solid state games, the computer wouldn't recognize the switch closer fast enough. They didn't get the current fast enough. So these capacitors are here to store a little charge so that when this switch fires, the computer, the MPU sees the input slightly faster and it works better. Now, sometimes these will go bad and you'll get a permanently closed switch. And so when you go into switch test on your machine, you're going to see permanently closed switches. And sometimes it's due to this capacitor being bad. New capacitors are super cheap and it's not that hard to just take this apart and solder it back in there. So if I run into that, I will go over that with you guys. So there's our nice new switch. And what you want to make sure is that this little finger is directly in the middle of that recessed area. You can kind of see through the top of it. So you want to just put it down right where it goes. And you can try and use again. So if you look here, here's the two marks. If I put it on the two marks, it's okay. It's a little bit too far this way. So I'm going to scooch it back a little bit. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see it or not, but basically the marks are about 1/16 of an inch off of where I need them to be. So again, point being, don't trust the marks, right? So we're just going to put this down. This front mark actually is okay. So I'm going to go ahead and drill it out. And again, I like to drill little pilot holes. It makes your life so much easier. These screws are not always super great at going through the plywood, but if you drill a little pilot hole, it makes a huge amount of difference. So when I'm doing this, I've got my Dremel tool here. I'll just show you that. With a little drill bit on it. And I just use that over and over again to drill out these little holes once I know exactly where they go. And again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the front one first. And I'm going to screw this down to where it's, you know, snug, but I can still move the switch. I can still pivot it back and forth like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the switch exactly where it needs to be for that little pin to be right in the center. And I'm going to drill this one out. Now this one is a little bit off, so I'm going to put it a little bit farther back. Right there. And we'll grab another screw. Come in here. Put this guy in. Now these bases of these pop switches, they're oblong, so you have some play back and forth like that. So then what I do is I get it in the spot, and I really want to make sure that when I actuate this skirt from underneath, that it doesn't hang on any of these edges. Sometimes if you have it in the wrong spot, when you go all the way to the end, it'll get stuck on the lip. You don't want that, because then obviously your pop's going to stick on and you're going to burn a coil or something. So that looks pretty good right there. So go ahead and put that down. And now we're good there. Then what I do is I check the gap on this switch. You want it a little under 1/16 of an inch, in my opinion, for nice lively pop bumpers. So that's pretty good there. So now for the solenoid itself, I'm going to take this apart and just clean it. And I usually go ahead and replace the sleeve just so it's done. While you've got all this apart, it's easy to do. Coil sleeves are cheap, and you know, it's just super easy to do at this stage. So there's two screws on the back. Again, a lot of you guys may know this, but I'll just go through it. 2 screws on the back that hold it in. This just slides straight out like that. And then your coil itself can come out. You can kind of clean this up a little bit. I use Simple Green. I think it cuts pretty well. It cleans it up pretty well. It doesn't tend to cause a lot of issues, and it smells good. So I like it. Okay. Now this little mechanism here, so I'm going to take this apart just to show you how it works and how it goes together, okay? So there's a couple different pieces. So this just comes off like that. So you've got this, which is the little collar that actually, again, screws into the back of the pop body there, or the bracket. You've got a spring here that goes onto the plunger. And then this is a little fiber collar. And this guy just slides out like that, okay? So if you look, comes apart like that. I'll go ahead and clean this just since I've got it apart. What the heck? And you don't have to do this. I mean, if it's working, it's probably fine. But since I'm taking it apart to show you guys what this thing looks like, I'll take it apart. We will do that. So what you're going to do to put it back together, okay, you take your, oops, wrong way. You take your plunger, goes to the back side, right? Now, this fiber piece goes the opposite way, and if you can see the little holes line up there, now you're going to slide your spring on, and there's a narrow end and a big end of the spring. The narrow end goes down so that it holds itself on there. And then you can take this guy, it's going to slide on this way, and then this back piece just sets right there in that little crescent shape. So there it is reassembled, okay? Now, in the pop itself, these 2 holes are going to go into the pop rings. So this is the pop ring. Here's the lugs for the pop ring, and it's going to go in there, and then there's some Nylox nuts that go on top of that. So here's my coil. So I'm going to pop this out. That's the old gross sleeve. And just spray some Simple Green on my towel here. And I like to just wipe these off. I mean, you don't have to, but again, it's all apart. It looks pretty, whatever. Makes it smell nice. Okay, so I have new coil sleeves here. Okay, and if you look, in general, when you put a mechanism together, you're going to want your soldered lugs, okay, away from your coil stop. Or, yeah, from your coil stop. The reason why is because when this fires, it's going to slam up and down against there. So you get a lot of vibration on this end, and that'll it can crack these solder joints, and you'll have issues. So if you look at this one, I don't know if you can see that one or not, but if you look at one of the other ones, I'll just point at this one. This is on these solder joints are away from this coil stop. So we're going to do it the same way. So when you put a coil sleeve in, it goes in the top side like that, pushes right in. If this is really hard to push in, or it won't go in, that means that your coil has overheated at some point in its life, and this little plastic in here has melted and deformed, and it's time for a new coil. So that should slide in really easily, just like that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take our bracket, wherever it is, it's right here. Okay, the little coil stop goes into the end like that. Okay, and you can see that the square end meshes in there really nicely. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our plunger, we're going to put it in, and you can see there's a little nub on the end of this, and that's going to go through the hole here. So it sits, I'm going to try and put it in here so you can see it. It sits right there. See how it's sitting inside now? I don't know if y'all can see that or not, but it's sitting inside of that coil of this little sleeve. So that's there. Now you just hold the whole thing together and flip it over, and we're going to put our screws back in. Get our trusty screwdriver and just screw that down and give it a good twist. I mean, these guys, they've got lock washers on them so they don't move, but this does get a lot of vibration, so you want to make sure they're in there good. Don't break them, obviously, but just make sure they're good and tight. Okay, now, when we install this thing, first of all, I'm going to move this. I'm going to pivot that out just a little because I don't want... So here you can see we've got a GI light here. And I don't want any possibility of metal-to-metal contact. So with that where it was, it probably was fine, but I just like to be extra sure because you don't want shorts. So when you put these on, your 3 pop nails go in the feet, and then you got to make sure that your lugs of your pop ring go through these holes as well. And sometimes it's a little fiddly, but if you kind of just get it in there, there we go. Well, look at that, pretty easy. It's like I knew what I was doing or something. Okay, so now it looks like that. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna get some nuts. There we go. And that's, I mean, I like to use the old original pop nails if I can. Sometimes they're broken just from the vibration over time and you have to replace them. But, you know, I like to try and reuse the old ones. So that's all done, and that is how you build a pop bumper. Then I always just go over and make sure, again, I don't want any metal-to-metal contact anywhere. So this is very clear. That's fine. I've got that in heat shrink wrap anyway. So that one's done. Okay, so I discovered a little issue here. Can you even tell me what's wrong with this picture? All right, so this is not connected. So what that means is that this capacitor went bad. And the operator, or the owner, wanted to just keep the machine going. So if you clip the lug, then, because when the capacitor goes bad, what basically happens is there's a short. So there's a short across this capacitor, and you get a continuous connection between these 2 lugs. So we can get the camera to focus. Okay, so I do this sometimes when I'm troubleshooting, but I don't leave it like this. So what you can buy, I'll show you this so we can get it to focus there. So these are the capacitors I use. They're 0.07 microfarads, 100 volts. And you can get these, I think 100 of them is like $5 or something. All right, so here's the switch before. And you can see there's a bunch of extra wire and crap on this lug. So I think I'm just gonna desolder the wires and rebuild this switch completely so that it's correct, because I don't wanna leave it looking ugly like that. Okay, here is our disassembled switch. I gotta be honest, this was kind of a pain in the ass to get apart and get desoldered, because whoever did this before, and I don't think it was Bally because I haven't seen this before from their switches, is they took like the extra wire from the end of the diode and the capacitor and wrapped it around and around and around and around and around like 15 times, which sucks. Don't do that crap, please. You really just need to make a connection. So it really makes it hard for somebody later on to desolder that and get it out of there. It was hard enough for me with the switch off the game. I cannot imagine trying to do that, you know, upside down, looking at the switch from underneath. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna solder in a new diode and a new capacitor, and I'll be right back. Okay, so here's our switch ready to be soldered up. I've just sort of stuck these components in here. So I have a new diode, and it's important to put the band in the right orientation. So there's a band on a diode, and that band goes to the upper center lug on these switches, and the other side goes to the side lug. And then the capacitor, you can see there, is between the bottom and the top lug. Capacitors are not, they don't have polarity, so it doesn't matter. Just put it in there. And then you can see, all I do is I could just kind of bend it over once so that it's holding in there, and I'll just put solder in that, and that'll hold it in there fine, and then I'll clip all those off. So if you don't know what a diode does, I didn't when I started, a diode blocks electricity one way. So my understanding is that the way the band is, it is blocked. And if you're away from the band, it's not blocked. Anyhow, so diodes are super cheap. I recommend if you're gonna take this step, just replace the old diode, because failed diodes can do the exact same thing. It'll give you an open switch. So I'm gonna solder this together, and then I'll show you what it looks like. Probably can't see that, but I don't put too much solder on. You're really, I'll show it to you real quick. You're really just trying to get the hole filled and it needs to be stable. So I'm going to get the bottom one now. You probably won't be able to see it very well, but just get in here, solder this in. That didn't work. Put a little bit more. There we go. So now what I'm going to do is just come in with my wire cutters and just snip off the extra bits. Just helps prevent shorts and it makes it look nicer. So when I put these together, what I try and do is leave a little tail for the capacitor. It just gives it some room to move because sometimes these will get in the way and you have to bend them one way or the other to get them out of there. But that one's done. It's all correct now, and we have a new capacitor in, and now we can put it in the machine. Okay, so I am ready to rebuild this drop target back here. So what I'm going to do is I do this off the machine. This is way too much of a pain in the butt to do on the machine. So I'm going to take these screws out and just really understand and document well where each one goes. So I'm going to take all these switches out and I'm going to remove this big coil that actuates the resets. Okay, drop target rebuild. Okay, so the way drop target mech works, at least this generation of Bally, is this plunger is going to be into the coil. When the drop target's all reset, it's going to fire. That's going to bring everything up, right? And then as you hit the targets, they pop down, and that's going to actuate things. Now, there's also, in this particular game, there's a set of coils that goes across here, and those are linked to the top rollover buttons. I've already removed that mechanism from here so I can get this off the playfield. But what happens when you hit a rollover button is it'll fire a little plunger that'll hit that guy and drop these down. So it's kind of a cool feature on this particular game, but it does make this drop mech a little more complicated to get off the playfield. So the idea here is that what we're going to do, oh look, prizes. Yeah, there you go, see? Treasures from the past. So what we're going to do is we're going to be removing all of these drop targets and replacing them with new ones. So what you can see, if you can, that there's little pins in there that need to come out. So this entire mechanism, so this rod has to come out, and then we can get the pins out and we can get everything out. So that's what we're going to do. Ready to go. So what actually, I think if I take this back piece off, it might be easier than taking all those pins out. So if I just take, if I take this back plate off, and the bottom needs to come off too. See this? Okay. So I'm gonna take this bottom piece off because I don't really want to take this entire rod apart. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think this is the best way to do this. It may not be, but we'll find out. So I'll take this piece off and we can clean it. All right, there's that. Now then, what you can see is that you've got these pieces on the back, and you can actually probably just get them off this way and maybe get them replaced, I think. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take a flathead screwdriver and my needle nose pliers. See, now you can see, like, organization is not my strong suit. So if anybody knows a good organizer or someone who can show me how to organize my workshop, that'd be great. See, someone's gonna comment and be like, you dumbass, I got one. You know, you don't do it that way. Okay, so now what happens, if you can see that's off. Now this is gonna slide out, right? Like that. And now you can take the spring out of here, and then this guy should theoretically slide out of there like that. Okay, so now I'll take this, take a new one, put this on there. And let's see, these are from Pinball Resource, pinballresource.com. They are really kind of the go-to.
Pizza's here.
Pizza's here, all right.
What?
Talking to the YouTubes. So they're really kind of my go-to for, if you really want correct stuff, they're probably your best source. I also use Marco, and I use Pinball Life, and that's pretty much where I tend to go for my needs. Let's see if I can get that in this shot. You can see what the hell I'm doing. If I can get it in there. Ooh, look at that. Movie magic. All right, I'm gonna put this guy on. And hopefully, it's going there. Sometimes I like to use some needle nose and just squeeze it on there like that. Okay, so there's one done, and it looks beautiful. You can see the yellowing and everything on the old ones. So I'm going to do the other three after I eat pizza. Okay, we're back. I had my pizza. I put this together. One thing I will say is be very careful of these pens when you're taking them out, because they do tend to fly off. I had one fly off that I have not yet found, so I had to use a spare that I had to get that going, which sucks, but is what it is. So, I may not be able to see this super well, but I'm going to try and show you how these work. So, when these fire, they come and they hit those, and it's going to drop it when it does so, right? So, it's hitting that with the little solenoid little tapper there. Quick little video. So, one thing I noticed was that this was on backwards. So those of you that knew what you were doing as I was doing it were like, hey, dumbass, you're putting it on backwards. I figured that out. So the side that's the shorter tab, you can see this one's longer here, goes on the back where the switches are. Also, you can look at these big holes. The big holes go towards the back. So what happens is if you look at the switch stack here, if I bring them all down, they're open. And then if I actuate one of them like that, it closes. So that's what you want. The other thing I was going to mention was when you're placing this, I don't know if you can see in there or not, probably not, but there's a slot inside here. And you want to make sure that that slot is exactly over the opening in the playfield. Because if you have it too far forward, there's a little lip that your drop targets have to catch on to stay up, and you won't get it because that's going to be next to the playfield and you don't have enough space for that little lip to hit. Let me see if I can go under the playfield and kind of show you. Okay, we're under the playfield, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see this or not, but there's a little box in there, and you want that box to be lined up on this slot. If you really want to locate it, you could take the whole front box off. Just take the metal off and take the screws off and locate it that way, and then put that base plate down and then screw everything else on. But if you just get under the playfield and shift it back and forth, you can see those little boxes there. So you want those lined up like that. So that way there's space for these to operate. The other way to do it is just to actuate it, right? So make them all come up and then just actuate them one at a time and see if they go down. See, it's having trouble, so it's too far back. So scooch it up just a little, actuate it again. And I mean, gravity's not your friend here, but just make sure they move smoothly. There you go, like that. I hate drop target max. All right, it's in. Little tip, this bottom piece is impossible to screw in with it on the playfield. So take it off the playfield first, get these pieces put in, and then screw it down. I got all these soldered in, so that's all fine. I decided these weren't that bad, so I'll solder those in tomorrow because this drop target mech is kind of taking it out of me for tonight. So that's all done. The good news is with that rebuilt, all I've really got left is slings. I don't need the ball kicker, the flippers, a couple more switches, and a bunch of lights. But the lights go pretty quick. You just have to solder, you know, wire to wire. It's just a matter of looking at the pictures and putting them in. So hopefully I can wrap this up tomorrow